This is Maureen for the Raw and Radical On Display podcast, conversations with amazing women in the arts. She works with paint and photography and installation, amongst other mediums. She is from Australia, from Adelaide, and she's from Estonian parents. She lives now in Spain and France. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I'm pleased to be invited.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think your work frames so well for this podcast because your main subjects are women.
Yes, that's right.
I was thinking that you could tell us how you started and why do you pick this subject, which is really overall most of your images, right?
Yeah, it's true. Most of my images are women. And it's funny that so many people ask me, why do you paint women? Why so many women? And I find it curious because for centuries, men have been painting images of women and nobody really asked them
For sure, yeah.
why are they painting women? And so it's just quite a curious question because there's so many women in historical images. So for me, it's a woman painting women from a totally different perspective. But in terms of the way that I got started, it evolved. I guess I was painting my own experience, and I come from a background that I originally trained to be an art teacher, but then when I finished my studies, I couldn't get a job teaching art, so I decided I'm going to set up my own business doing something. So I set up a business doing fashion design where I was making clothes and selling them. So that
wow, interesting.
Yeah, so I was making one-off silk dresses, and I had this exposure to the fashion world and mannequins and display and modelling and models, and that provided part of the influence in terms of my choice of subject matter, and also a love of old pictures, old paintings, the way that women are represented. They're so beautiful, but there's a combination of frustration with the way they're depicted, and then admiration.
Yeah, it's interesting because your women are. I mean, I'm talking in a general way, but I think you women have a real sensuality. And they are very expressive in their movement. And in the same time, I mean, they're very woman-like. They really look like women. And some of them really look at us straight in the eyes. I mean, a lot of them actually really look at us straight in the eyes. And you feel like they're really telling us something, right?
Oh.
And then they also, I can feel that movement, and you also see all the fabrics, how they fall on the body and how they fall with the movement. And they're also very strong. They appear very strong a lot of the time. Yeah. So in the exhibition Bad Mannerism, those paintings they look so fragile, and yet they are so big and so strong. So there's a bit of a duality. I was wondering if you can talk a bit about that.
Yes, well, there is a duality, and in my paintings, I like to pose questions rather than give answers, and I get overwhelmed very easily, and I have lots of different arguments and different points of view going around in my head at any given time. So in my paintings, it's almost like a pictorial argument with myself.
Awesome.
So I say, maybe it's like this, and maybe it's like this, and a bit of this. And so I try to put the different elements all in together. And so at one glance, you can get the whole picture, literally. And then you can look at it bit by bit. But a lot of the reason why I paint the women in the way that I paint them is because when I was growing up, I felt invisible, and squashed. And my family, I grew up in a very strict family where my parents were war refugees from Estonia. And my mother was 6 years old when she had to leave Estonia, and the whole family went to Germany. And similar scenario with my father, but he was a little bit older. My mother spent 9 years in displaced persons camps in Germany during the war and ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so when I was born into this kind of family, it was quite traumatic for me. And it was almost as if that my mother was so traumatized that she just continued this, the model of the refugee camp in the home.
Wow.
So our home was like living in a refugee camp. That's how it felt like. And it's only really now that I've been able to analyze it and talk to my sister about it and figure out what it was like. But it felt like we were in that same model had been brought home. So because my sister and I both were, and I have a brother as well, but my sister and I seem to feel it the most. And so it was a very high control environment where we didn't have any say, we didn't have any power. It was just a matter of complying with rules and regulations. So now when I am painting my women, I want to be seen, I want to feel strong. My main problem when I was growing up was that I just felt like nobody noticed me. I was invisible. And so now I paint in my paintings, which you can't see when you look at the reproduction on the internet, but my paintings are all very large, and the women are all larger, much larger than life size. So they're giants, because I feel like I don't want you to ignore my women.
Yeah.
My women have to be seen.
Yeah. This is great, actually. I think a lot of us have this issue with invisibility and being, the good girl to do the right thing and not make a fuss, not stand out, be the perfect doll in a way. And in your work, you also use dolls. Yes,
whether it's dolls or fashion store mannequins. And the most recent series you talk about bad mannerism. I've used mannequins from Zara shop windows in Barcelona. And then I've used figurines also, which were little figurines that were of children or women that were in my mother's china cabinet when I was growing up, and my grandmother's china cabinet. So with these dolls, when I was growing up, I absolutely detested dolls. I hated dolls with a vengeance, and I couldn't at the time. Well, I wouldn't be able to explain why, but it was because the doll represented the perfect child, this model that I was being forced into, and I knew it. Yeah. I knew it, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So if anybody gave me dolls, I murdered my dolls. I attacked them with a vengeance, and it was the only way I could express my anger and frustration. So my mother told everybody, don't give her dolls.
Did you have room and space for creativity?
There was no encouragement for it. Actively, it was some space that I made for myself, because I was so frustrated and just had I actually had a lot of anger inside, even though I looked like I was a really good girl and I complied and so on, but I had so much going on inside. Yeah. And as a sensitive, nervous child, it was probably even worse. So I ended up starting just to make little sketches and little drawings in my notebooks of almost like a visual problem solving. I would do pictures of what I wanted my world to be like. I would look at the calendar in the kitchen, which would say of the Swiss Alps, and I'd never been to Switzerland. I still haven't been to Switzerland, actually.
You have to come.
I know, and I would draw pictures of these mountains because they represented freedom for me, and they represented space and openness. Wow. So I then moved on to going to my dad's garage. We lived in a house on a block of land like everybody does in Australia. And I went to his garage and I had been given some oil paints. I can't remember where I got them from, but I started painting pictures on little scraps of cardboard that were there on the weekends. And I created these landscapes or places that I wanted to go, or I took pictures that were around me and just incorporated these images to create my own pictures. And this was the only part of my world that I had any control over.
Wow.
That I felt this was my own tiny little speck of the universe where I could control this part of my life, and I could express freely all the things or some of the things that were brewing inside.
Yeah, wow. And now look at that. Large scales. Yeah, this is fantastic. Yeah. Do you think that we are, in which way do you think we are influenced by our limited belief and the people around us, the pressure from the peers around us when we grow up?
Well, it's a very hard balance, because we need other people and we need them to survive, and we are totally interdependent. None of us can live independent lives, and so it's a very hard balancing act for everybody in their lives, and especially for me when I was growing up in my particular family background. My parents just wanted to become totally Australian, and my mother probably became more Australian than the Australian, so she would just worry about what the neighbours were thinking and copy what they were doing, and she would actually say to us when we were doing something, "What will the neighbours think?"
Yeah, I heard that one too.
Yeah, and my father didn't really care about what the neighbours thought, but my father was working too hard to have much time to interact with us. So it was very much inbred or bred into us as children about conforming. And I sometimes fantasize what it would be like growing up in a different kind of family where that scenario would be different. And different societies are different as well. I imagine Switzerland is different from, say, Spain.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've seen a lot of people not really pursue art career or creative careers because of peer pressure, and because also of the environment, how it is, how easy it is to become a creative person or not. And I think the environment where we grow up really has an influence on our lives, and also is really limiting us in some ways to be able to grow and expand and really become who we are. I'm 100% sure of this. The more I see things through the years, the more I am convinced that our environment has a big influence on how far we can go.
I guess I had thought so much about the family environment but it's true that the general environment has a large impact as well. And it took me a long time to become an artist. I always painted, I always made work, but I didn't become an artist for a very long time because I just resisted. I didn't even know that this existed. I hadn't been given permission to do so. When I wanted to go to art school, my mother called me bohemian. And so that didn't go down very well at all. And so in a kind of compromise, I decided, well, I won't be an artist, I'll be an art teacher. I'll do the art teaching course, so I'll always be able to fall back on teaching.
Yeah.
So it was a very long time. I did all sorts of other jobs before I had the confidence to end up doing what I wanted to do the whole time.
Do you feel like it's a bit like a parallel word? If sometimes we see others do it and we feel like it's not even for us, that we cannot even consider it. So we know it exists, but it's not for us. We feel separated from that reality.
Yeah, it's true. And I didn't have any models. I didn't know any artists or see that it was a viable career option. When I went to career guidance at school, and we had an interview with some guy that looked like a public servant that turned up, and everything I said I wanted to do, he said, "Oh no, that's very competitive. Oh no, that's very competitive." Everything I said.
I think we all heard that all over the world. It's very competitive. Don't go there.
Yeah. So it was just, it was crazy, really. I think for me, the turning point to become an artist was just the frustration just built up. It was like a pressure cooker, just gradually over the years. Yeah. The pressure kept building up. And one day I found myself, just by myself. I was in Sydney and I was at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, the main Sydney Art Museum, and I was looking at an exhibition of modernist paintings. And there was the Kandinskys and the Beckman and the whatever. And I just basically, tears came to my eyes. I just started crying because I just thought, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, it was just so.
Wow.
And the fact that I was there by myself, no one was with me in Sydney that day. And I just thought, I just have to do this.
Wow. So it really came strong to you. So it built it and built it and built it. And then one day you say, that's it.
Yeah.
What did you do after that?
Well, my partner was very encouraging, and because I always said, yes, I want to do it, but you know how you procrastinate? Yeah. I sort of said, yes, I want to do this, but what am I going to do to take the step? So I took a step. I just enrolled for one subject at art school because I'd studied art teaching before, but that's not the same really as studying pure fine art degree. So I went to a new art school that had started that was like an atelier-based art school in Adelaide. And I just did one subject. And I thought, well, I'll see what this is like. Life painting I did. And I thought, well, I know all of this already. I'll be fine. But I actually realised that I had a lot to learn. And I was just riveted. I was fascinated because it was the first art school that would actually teach some skills, and the skills was the vocabulary that I needed.
Yeah.
So after doing my one subject in 1 year, I got a scholarship to study full-time.
Nice.
At the art school. So I then studied there for the next 2 years and completed my degree. And then I got a scholarship to go to London and study at Chelsea College of Art.
Nice.
To do my master's. So that's a huge thing too. And just one thing led to another. I established a studio in Adelaide when I finished my course and set up with, we had an all-women studio.
Nice. Wow.
With 6 artists together. It was really good.
Amazing. So you stayed in London, you went into the studio, and after, how did you end up in Spain?
Well, in London, I was only in London for 1 year because I had a scholarship. Everything was paid for, accommodation, study, everything, to do my master's at Chelsea College. And then at the end of the year, I wasn't sure what to do next because London's a very expensive place. Yeah. I was lucky because at the end of the year show, some big name collectors came through and I sold my work to them, or they purchased my work. And Charles Saatchi came and bought 2 of my big paintings, and I was in total shock. I couldn't sleep for a whole night.
Fantastic, yeah.
And as a result of some big name collectors buying my work, like the brother-in-law Richard Branson, the Branson family bought my work.
Nice.
A lot of high-profile people, because it just happened to be, the art world happened to be just big names who were the local names. So I didn't want to go back to Australia. I think secretly I'd always been longing to escape from Adelaide. Well, it wasn't very secret, actually. I had always been longing to escape from Adelaide. It's not because Adelaide's not a nice place, it is, but I just wanted to experience more and do more and see more. And because my family had a European origin, in many ways I felt more at home in the European side of the world than in Australia, or equally so at least. So after London, my partner is French, or he's actually French-Spanish, so his mother's French and father Catalan. And we'd always wanted to spend some time here. So he had inherited a little apartment in Montpellier in the south of France.
Nice, yeah.
So we decided that instead of staying in London, we would just go to Montpellier because we could stay there for free. We didn't have to pay exorbitant rent, and we would just try things out for a while.
Yeah, it's a great place.
So, yeah, so then one thing led to another, and Barcelona is so close, it's a 3-hour drive. And so now we have a place in Barcelona as well. He inherited a place in Barcelona. So
nice.
Convenient. So now we're between the two places. But Barcelona is just such an exciting city.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite irresistible.
Yeah. So you would agree that the environment really brings extra inspiration to your creativity?
Totally, because there's it's not just the visual environment, which is definitely part of it, but it's the social environment. It's the energy of the people, the aspiration.
Yeah.
Even walking down the street, when I'm walking to my studio in Barcelona, and it's not in this really super central, super rich area. It's in quite a nice area, but it's just on the edge of Barcelona. But I walk past and I see everyone on the street smiling, having fun, all ages, old people, young people. There's such a good energy. And you feel it, you breathe it in.
I totally understand that. You felt a calling, right? You felt this strong inside you. So, and I think we all can feel it in a different intensity. And I was wondering, how did you recognize it? How did you decide to act on it? What made you really feel that it was really a calling and it was not just, a whimsical idea or just your imagination? Or I know it's hard to grasp, right? It's a hard feeling. Because I think like through my life, I've been really following that calling, and then when you get disconnected from it, meaning not following it, then things starts to feel, I don't know if it's unreal or wrong, or you start to be in the wrong movie. And it's like you can imagine how your life should be, but then it's not, So I was wondering if you can tell us a bit about that, because you had such a strong, not vision, but a strong picture of it.
Yes, for me, I tried all sorts of other options, and I was so depressed and so miserable, I had no choice. So I tried normal jobs. I worked in retail management, and I would just be driving to work and be in tears. I got so depressed and just so miserable, where I felt that I just did not belong. And I could do all these jobs perfectly well. People thought I was really good at it. I was running a $5 million business in the ground floor of a department store, responsible for that, this part of the business. And I could do a perfectly good job, but I was so miserable. So recognizing the calling was almost like it was a matter of life or death for me. It was survival. I just couldn't be happy any other way. And the choice was forced upon me. It was my health that was at stake. My mental health was at stake.
Wow.
Not that it's an easy option, because there are a lot of hardships, and it's not an easy road deciding to be self-employed, to be an artist.
Yeah.
But the other options, all just one by one, got crossed off.
It's like, okay.
So that was it.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, and when we look at your work now, I mean, Wow, I'm so glad that you followed this calling, because imagine you wouldn't have done any of it. I mean, this is, I think, something we can all really hold on to. When you have such a body of work like yours, to really feel like, well, if we don't do it, then what would we have missed? Really, it's mind-boggling, and it's beautiful, and it's crazy, and it's amazing because you did it. So yeah.
Yeah, but you say that, but I don't feel that, and I don't think. I mean, I thank you for the compliment. It's so good to get this kind of response and feedback. But I think all of us have our self-doubts, and it's trying not to let that self-doubt rule what we do and rule our lives, because the self-doubt can be so overwhelming. And I found that, from my experience, the better the artist, the more the self-doubt, because the artists that are so truly self-confident and sure of themselves are the ones that are not very self-critical in terms of the quality of their work.
Interesting, yeah.
And because sometimes I meet people that start telling me about their work, and I'm expecting to see some masterpiece, and when I'm actually confronted with the work in real life,
okay.
And that's the thing, because they're so good at self-promoting and marketing, and clearly not, the self-critical part isn't part of their makeup. So we need to be self-critical. We need to be constantly striving, but not in a destructive way. So it's trying to manage those two aspects.
Yeah.
That's hard.
And so how do you do that? Because self-doubt, oh gosh, it's really powerful. I mean, it can really, I feel it can really take us in ways that, it kind of sneaks in, and then it's there, and then it criticizes not just what you do, but who you are and how you do it, and the past, the present, the future. It's everywhere. It's like a virus, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I have had to make a conscious effort and try all sorts of strategies over time, because I overthink my work, and then I'll repaint a painting on top of it several times, and I'll think, oh, this is crap. I've got to redo it. And often I have repainted the same painting on top of an old painting on top of an old painting, when there was nothing wrong with the first one. The second one was just different. Yeah. Both paintings could have happily existed in the world, but I'm now, what I'm trying to do is, I really need to shut out the audience when I'm making my work, because I edit too much. I actually made a big sign that went up in my studio that was there for a while, saying, "The world needs my art," just to remind myself. Nice. And I now try and make my work, and I have this imaginary an audience of one, and I just think there's an audience of one. It's myself, and I'm the audience, and I need to shut out the audience, because I edit to try and fulfill expectations of what people would want for my work. Even when I have an exhibition coming up, I try not to consider the audience. Yeah. But in my subconscious, there is this little seed in the back of my head thinking, no, this has got to be this show, and what are people going to think about this if I put this in? So I find it a struggle to make my work in an authentic, in a totally authentic and vulnerable place, which is where I need to be. I know I need to be there in an authentic and vulnerable place, so that everybody else will relate to it, and I'm being honest. Yeah, that makes total sense. It's a very nice image, what you just gave us. When you started with your master, you had big name collectors buy your work. How do you stay there for your career? Yeah, well, I don't think anybody stays in any place, and I think it's normal that there are ebbs and flows, there are fluctuations. You may be in fashion today, you may be out of flavor tomorrow. So for me, it's a matter of being true to yourself, and which is the old. It might sound cheesy, but it's just to make your work and keep on with making your work, and not to worry so much. Not to be set off course by either the good critiques or the bad critiques, because yes, I have sold my work to big collectors, but things change. I've been with galleries, and galleries have closed. I found myself with no galleries. I found myself with masses of galleries. But in the end, it's you in your studio with the work, and that. Yeah. And making the good work is the priority. But my work is my priority, not the collectors, not the galleries. Although I need them as well, and I want to share my work. But if I'm not making good, honest, truthful work, the rest of it is a waste of space.
Yeah, totally. Would you say that your work has to do with freedom and liberation?
Yes, freedom is a huge theme in my work, because I felt that I had no freedom as a child. So in my images, for example, in my images of women that are doing house chores, like dusting or cleaning, and I've taken this for inspiration, these tiny little paintings, Dutch genre paintings, for example, by Vermeer and his contemporaries, where you have these little women painting and doing their chores inside, and I reinterpreted them by using contemporary women doing the dusting or the ironing, but I put them outside in the landscape, and I turned them into heroic figures. Yeah. So they were outside of the home, and they were having some power in influencing the world.
Yeah, because in one of your image, the duster is like some kind of magic wand or some kind of a sword of a superhero.
She's got this rainbow duster that she's dusting like a magic wand on top of this mountain, holding up in the sky.
Exactly, yeah.
And then these sparks flying off the top of the mountain, this light.
Yeah. And she looks straight at us.
Yeah, I love to engage that direct gaze with the viewer. I do it deliberately, because having someone look you directly in the eyes and establishing contact is important for me, for my figures, to actually be confronting the viewer, saying, I'm here, you need to look at me, I'm looking at you. Yeah,
very visible. So what are you working on now?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on getting a new studio, my new studio in Barcelona. I've actually just been fixing it up, repairing walls, plastering, painting walls instead of painting pictures. But that's maybe just a couple of weeks' work away to being ready. So I'm really excited, because for the first time, I'm going to have a much bigger space to work in, where I can stand far enough back from my pictures to see them. I've previously been in spaces that were all a bit too small.
Oh, wow, great.
So I'm working on getting the new studio happening, and I've actually imposed upon myself a kind of a gap year, because I want the space, the emotional and the mental, psychological space to start a new body of work without having a gallery deadline, without having this imposed upon me. And I want to see as an experiment what happens, and if this affects the work in some way, this freedom to experiment. I'm designating one day a week just as playtime, so I'm just going to have 25% of my time where I'm going to play with no outcome in mind.
Great. I love this idea, the experimental day.
Yeah, because we need to do it. If you think, I heard somewhere that people working at development places, like people working at Google, or places that are doing software development, and not that Google is any example, but they are given one day a week to experiment and come up with new ideas. And I thought, more than anybody, we as artists need to do that. And not be fixed into this production mode where we're just doing cookie cutting and following a formula. So that's part of the plan.
Yeah, discovering more of the inner world. Wonderful. Do you have any advice for our listeners?
Well, I always feel that I'm very bad at giving advice, but because I should take my own advice. We're all, or else we're good at giving advice and not following our own advice, because advice is yes, it sounds really good, but I think the main thing is actually just doing the work and not overthinking it. And that's my advice to myself.
That's an awesome
one.
I
overthink everything, and don't overthink, just do the work. But there's an old Estonian proverb that I read. It says, to learn to do the work, just do the work.
Yeah, I like that one. That's a good one. I'm going to put it on my wall. Excellent.
Yeah.
One last thing, maybe. How do you see the role of women artists in the world in general?
Yes, it's a big topic for me, the role of women artists in the world, because we've had a pretty rough run up until now.
Yeah.
And I also see women artists as having a tougher time, because a curator was discussing this topic with me fairly recently, and this is a woman talking to me, and she said to me, that you either have to be very young or very old to make it as a woman artist. And she said, no, I wasn't in the very young role, so she said, you're not old enough yet.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that I was perturbed, and a bit shocked, but that this is something that doesn't apply to male artists. No one would say to a man, you're too young, or you have to be really young, or you have to be really old. So that was really quite intriguing. But I think as women, we just need to stick together a lot more.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
I've always wanted to have a project where I curate exhibitions with women artists. I know so many good women artists whose work's not being seen.
Yeah.
So I see that as a project for the future, to curate shows, pop-up shows, just with women artists, and just make ourselves visible, put ourselves out there, not wait for someone else to do it for us.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks so much, Chris, for spending the time and being so open.
It's a pleasure.
And have a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave me comments or questions. Don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter and follow us on social media. Until next time, get lost, dream, and shine.